Whoops.
Good evening, and welcome to UAS's Evening at Egan Lectures. This annual fall lecture series is free to the general public and live streamed through YouTube. You can locate that at youtube.com/UA Southeast. There are two ways you can help support this event. Join UAS alumni and friends of the Egan Library Network. Make a gift to the UAA Friends of the Egan Library. There are cards on each row of the chairs. If you fill that out, you can go ahead and give me the cards in the end. There are pens in the back if you'd like to use them. And there are also envelopes if you so choose to mail it instead. You can find more information online at www.uas.alaska.edu/Egan Lecture. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Bathrooms are located in the back. Emergency exits are also in the back, but on this side. And there are two handicap parking spots in the back on the side over here, if you so choose to use them. The elevators are located, this thing wants to fall down. The elevators are located in the back. Please remember to turn off your cell phones. And we will have time in the end of the discussion for questions. Please wait for me to give you the mic so that our people online can hear what your questions are. And now please join me in welcoming Dean of Arts and Science, Dr. Tom Thornton, who will be introducing our guest speaker.
Thank you. And before I introduce Vera, I just want to shamelessly plug this series. We have really a wonderful lineup, and unfortunately, we have competition tonight. We have Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who just filled the seats in the auditorium here and is now probably doing the same thing at Chapel by the Lake. So I think that's a reflection of who's here, but I know there are some people online as well. Last week, we had the most unimaginably good weather, but we know that's not going to continue. So there are many good reasons to come to Evening at Egan over the next few weeks. But as you know, it's a combination of lectures by our own faculty, guests from the community, and guests that we invite from out of town. And next week is one from our own faculty member, David Noon, who has just come back from sabbatical, and the title of his talk must intrigue you: The Gothic Executive, Images of Presidential Violence in American Popular Culture, from Andrew Jackson to Donald Trump. Okay. And then following that, What is Food? Eating and Mutual Aid by Dr. Alexis Shotwell, Associate Professor of Sociology at Carleton University in Ottawa. Then Alaska Beyond Oil on October 4th by Kate Troll, and on and on. We have a especially good lineup during Native American History Month in November as well. So do spread the word about these lectures. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Vera Starbard, who is now Playwright-in-Residence at Perseverance Theater. And you may know that UAS has a memorandum of agreement with Perseverance Theater, and we have for many years. It was supported by a generous endowment, the Connie Bucheever Endowment for the Arts. And it's maybe lacked champions since our Professor Nina Cordes retired a couple of years ago. But it's still in existence, and one of the things that's very nice is we usually have an event for UAS students, faculty, staff, alumni in the spring in April. a UAS night down at Perseverance Theater. And we often have, and this is a hint, the Playwright-in-Residence come out and offer a course at UAS. So that sounds like a good idea to me. But maybe we'll talk more about that. I didn't get a yes yet, but I'm interested. Okay, Vera Marlene Starbard, or Sate Quay, was born in Craig, Alaska. She is Tlingit, Raven Dog Salmon of the Devilfish House, and Denali Athabascan. And she has all kinds of relatives in the state and has lived almost everywhere, including Juneau, Kodiak, and Anchorage. Her storytelling achievements began early in life, including the award for Best Storyteller in Miss Stitchick's class in first grade. Okay, so we're talking about a prodigy here. Art, reading, writing, and telling stories were her greatest joys from the beginning. She knew she wanted to be a writer in kindergarten. Okay. After graduating from East Anchorage High School in 2000 as the editor of the school newspaper, she began editing newspapers professionally and has made writing and editing a part of her work since. She was the editor of the Anchorage Native News for 6 years at South Central Foundation and was a contributor to the University of Alaska Anchorage Book of the Year entitled Alaska Native Culture and Issues, Responses to Frequently Asked Questions. Vera completed a historical fiction book in 2010 with an Individual Artist Award from the Rasmussen Foundation and has received numerous awards for writing and editing from Public Relations Society of America, Alaska Professional Communicators Society, Alaska Press Club, and the Alaska Federation of Natives. She has also received the Juneau Mayor's Individual Artist Award and the Alaska Literary Award. Following her passion for journalism and communications, Vera became editor of First Alaskans magazine in 2013, a position she continues to hold. Our Voices Will Be Heard, Vera's premiere play, was produced at Perseverance Theater in 2016, playing in Juneau, Hoonah, and Anchorage, with a revival show in Fairbanks. It was published the following year in an anthology textbook, Contemporary Plays by Women of Color. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Vera met her husband, who's also in the theater and also now serving on the board of Perseverance Theater. Is that correct? Yep. And along with her husband and 3 playwrights from the Alaska Native Playwrights Project, Vera co-founded an Alaska Native theater company called Dark Winter Productions to promote Alaska Native playwriting and acting. Vera was selected as the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation National Playwright Residency Program Award winner in 2016. She is the first Alaskan and the first Alaskan Native American Indian resident in the history of the program. In 2019, her residency was renewed for an additional 3 years, so she will continue her employment and commission with Perseverance through July 2022. Vera's first play commissioned through the residency, Devilfish, premieres at Perseverance Theater in Juneau next week, that is September 20th, 2019, and in Anchorage on October 25th. A recent development in Vera's professional experience is as a writer for the PBS Kids animated program, Molly of Denali, about which we had a presentation last year's Evening in Egan series. The show premiered in July 2019, and Vera wrote several episodes including Turn on the Northern Lights, Canoe Journey, and Eagle Tale. So please join me in welcoming Vera Starbard.
And now my time is up. I'll show you the version of the biography idea because it's always a little awkward. But hello, goodness teach for being here. Hi. Hello. Yes, I do. Extra thank you for being here. I know the climate change one was popular. I ran into a friend on the way in, and I was like, "Oh, you coming to my lecture?" He's like, "No, I'm going to the climate change." I was like, "My lecture?" And he's like, "No." So, thank you. He's not my friend anymore. So my presentation, still healing through storytelling. I'm going to explain the title in a little bit. I've gotten a few questions about the title. And this is actually kind of the first presentation of a workshop that's going to be called Still Healing Through Storytelling that I'll be doing actually throughout Southeast. So you're my guinea pigs. This is the version of the bio I usually do. I just put it up and go, you can read that. And it's the little clip, the bullet points of what he just said, and I thank you for giving that. As he said, my name is Vera Starbard. Tsekwe yuhat duasak, shuneri hatsati, dakdin tanyari. I was born in Craig. I actually spent a lot of years here in Juneau. As he said, I moved all over. My dad was a state trooper, so I spent preschool here, part of kindergarten, 2nd grade. I graduated middle school. Like, I've been in and out of Juneau quite a lot. Zonkdehini is my alma mater. And now, as the Playwright-in-Residence at Perseverance Theater, I'm here a whole lot more. And when I'm here, I live with my grandma in the same bedroom that I lived in with her when in middle school. So I'm right back at 12 years old. So probably in Juneau, Our Voices Will Be Heard was my play that premiered in 2016. And I think that's probably what I'm most known for in the community. It was an autobiographical play. As you can see, it's more like a 19th century version of my autobiography, but it was a version of my story about my mother discovering that I had been sexually abused by her brother when I was a child, and kind of what happened, the fallout from that. And that while I had been involved for many years in advocacy about childhood sexual abuse issues, that definitely sort of launched me further sort of into that world of healing, really, is kind of how I see it. And a direct result of that was the workshop, Healing Through Storytelling. I did that because we knew there was going to be some issues coming up for people with the play. Already in the readings in LA, the readings in New York, here in, actually right at UAS, right over there, we had a reading and actors would leave. It was really tough for them. And audience members would really get upset. So we knew that we needed to have some care for audience members and we needed to have some care for actors. And we needed to not just sort of drop this really tough subject play into a community and then leave. We really wanted to look after the audience members that were gonna come see it and maybe stirred up. So Healing Through Storytelling, which ended up going all over. It grew way beyond the time period of the play, and I'm actually still doing those workshops today. And I've done them with very small groups in homes. I've done them with 90 people here at UAS. I've done it at AFN. And essentially it's just teaching artistic methods to deal with trauma. That's how I worked through my trauma. That's how I worked through my abuse. That was the play that came out of it. The very way that my parents found out about the abuse was I drew. I did art. Art is a way for people who struggle to know what to say to be able to say something and process through that. So it was just a beginning of, here is one way, and we'd usually choose a few mediums to just start that process. And sometimes it looked like this. It was their own thing about their emotions and what they were feeling, and we never asked them to explain it unless they wanted to. Sometimes there were stories. Always really liked it when people would write, because we got the best stories. And they're almost all, the best stories are from the people who say, I'm not really a storyteller, but, and then we get these gorgeous stories out of them. Some of them were a little bit more of a combo between sort of right brain, left brain. The River of Life or the Tree of Life was a way to kind of use through metaphor, tell your life story. And with art, part of the presentation, part of what we were teaching them, I think people don't have a hard time going, yeah, art does something for you spiritually or emotionally or even mentally. Like, most people kind of accept that. Whether they give a lot of credence to it or not is another thing, but they'll at least say, yeah, that emotionally got me. If you've ever seen a horror flick, you know it'll get you emotionally. It'll get you scared. You might cry at a sad one. You might see a painting or a music you love and feel something. So that part isn't kind of the hard part to talk to people about. But actually, there's so many studies going on now that talk about, for instance, listening to music, that it affects your physical health. It affects your physical being. There are dozens and dozens. I just grab a few of them. Improves heart rates in heart attack patients. That's important if you're a heart attack patient, to improve your heart rate. Reducing cortisol levels, literally improving your oxygen levels. Creating visual art, specifically creating it, so that was listening to music. This is actually creating. One of my favorite ones was they actually did a study with a group that was healing from broken bones and another group that was healing from broken bones, identical physical therapy. The only difference was one group painted 20 minutes every day, and they painted whatever they want. And it was a 10% increase in their healing time, how fast they actually healed. Dance and theater movement. This is something that actually I've not still approached yet. It's still something I struggle with as far as being comfortable with. And what's interesting is the thing it's shown to affect are the things I struggle with. It's almost as if there's a predictable way to be related. Writing, which is my sort of go-to, literally like improving these lymphocyte counts in HIV patients. I mean, these are really really good things to happen and really specifically medical things to happen. And an awful lot of them also have anxiety, suicidal ideation reduction. These are really important things that our whole society struggles with right now. And art is an avenue into that sort of pathway to healing. So these are kind of what the workshops would start with, is just getting you to be familiar. Usually they were with people who do not consider themselves artists. And we got the most beautiful, meaningful art to come out of it. But almost always we'd also have people who struggled with, what do I do? I'm not, that sort of inner voice that's, I can't write, I can't paint, I can't draw. So there was one at AFN, it was actually one of the very first workshops I did, where this elder who was really struggling and he just wasn't doing anything, and there was 90 people and I'm sort of going all over the place, but I could see he just still wasn't doing anything. And so I stopped by and I asked him, like, how can I help? Like, what's going on? And he said, I don't know what to put on the paper. Like, I can't paint, I can't do these things. And so I showed him this. I never explain this to people. This is a painting of mine. I love to paint, I'm not very good at it. I showed him this and I said, this was a very specific time in my life. This is how I felt. It is not a good painting. I don't put it up on the wall. I don't explain it, but that is how I felt. And if I'm ever there again, this is what I look at. And whatever that was, I didn't explain this to him either, sparked something in him. And at the very end of the session, he comes and he hands this to me. I get emotional every time I look at this. This is a painting he did about his son who committed suicide. And it reads, if you can't read it, this is how I felt 18 years ago. My heart was broken. All my dreams were shattered. As you can see, it's not a good painting. And it is one of the most memorable, valuable things I own now. His wife came up to me after, and he gifted this to me. His wife came up to me after, and she said, he's never talked about that. He's never spoken about it. But he did this. And he still, as far as I know, didn't speak about it then to her, but he did this. And that was just the start. And I would love to see him again. I would love to see if he's continued that. I'd love to see if that stirred up anything. And I don't mean I hope he became a painter. I mean, was there something triggered there that made him look at writing or look at some kind of outlet for that? And these are things for that workshop that I think were helpful. I keep doing it and I love it and I want to keep doing it. But also we are kind of starting to see, then what? You're kind of going, okay, people are really looking at this, but now we want something else. And I noticed as I'm talking about these, pretty much every time I keep referencing certain things. And this one's funny to me. So if you look at pretty much any movie, which is my only experience with non-native funerals, or I should say funerals that aren't from my family, this is what you see. And it's sort of this people that go and wear black and go to a funeral and come back and are uncomfortable and don't talk, and then they're done. And that just seems so foreign to me. So like, is that how it's done? Is that how people really do it? This is my only thing. And then I went to one and it was kind of like this. Where that comes from, FYI, I'm a total Downton Abbey fan. So, P.S., it's premiering the same day as my play. That's just cruel. But this episode was actually is done in a beautifully artistic way. It was about grieving and how formal that is in this sort of world, how restrained it was, how many rules there were around it. And this is where that came from. The sort of contemporary United States tradition around funerals and grieving comes from not Downton Abbey necessarily, but this era. And it's fascinating. They actually have several episodes. Well, a lot of people die. It's a bit of a soap opera, but there are quite a few episodes about grieving, and that's really interesting to me to see kind of the roots of where our kind of United States society takes that. Now, Tlingit people, that is not remotely how we handled funerals, handled memorials, handled grieving. What we did was very communal. And that seems obvious. As a funeral, you come together and then you grieved communally. You took care of each other communally. You healed communally, and that was never anything you were going to address alone, ever. And I think that's so strikingly different from what I understand sort of modern United States grieving to be. It's sort of a personal thing, and people are afraid to ask you about it. What would happen, the sort of short version, this is a years-long process, and once you were all gathered, it was a many days-long process. After some period, sometimes years, probably at least a year, you would gather. Actually, let me step back a little bit. During your grieving, at your moment of grieving, all Tlingit people are either Raven or Eagle. As a Raven, the Eagle people, like my husband, or relatives that are Eagle, would take care of me, and we call that lifting you up. That is their responsibility to do. And they're actually pretty complex protocol about what those specific responsibilities are. Especially back then, they would take care of the funeral expenses. They would take care of anything you ate. If it was a very prestigious person, you might actually rebuild the person's house who died. You would probably at least fix it up quite a bit more. So when it came time for the memorial party, that's the time to sort of pay back those people who lifted you up for years sometimes. These people were lifting you up. And you would spend all that time creating things. You'd be creating art. And you'd gather, the whole village, you'd gather from many villages, and spend days, many days, receiving these gifts, being fed, being paid back for that time that you lifted them up. So as a Raven, my job would then be to host all of these people who lifted me up in my time of grief. And they were huge. They were huge. There was so many complex traditions and ceremonies and protocols around that I'm sure I'm just sort of plowing through. But I also think it was one of the most beautiful traditions we had, because it was sort of a microcosm of what our culture was about. And it was about teaching and lifting you up and making sure everyone's taken care of. Richard Downhauer and Nora Downhauer, they have actually a lot of material on this. This one specific book about grieving speeches. For it being the grieving process, for it to work, the two halves have to come together. So I have my part and you have your part, and it's not going to do us any good for healing unless we bring the two halves together. If you are not grieving with your opposites, if you're not grieving with your family, you're not grieving and you're not healing. And it's okay to grieve, but you need to do it together. One of the most poignant moments in my life was actually when my cousin unexpectedly died at the age of 17. I was 15. And the whole community was just absolutely destroyed by this. He was on a full scholarship to Arizona. He was just about to leave for college, and he was in a car accident and died. And it just wrecked the whole small community. And I'll never forget the leader of Heidelberg came over, so this was in Craig. He came over, and there's always jokes as we have kind of the Clinkets versus the Haidas, and he's sort of leader of the Haida community. And so there's always that little bit of competition. I'll never forget that he came over and he said to us as a community at the funeral, when you're hurting, we're hurting. And that meant so much to say that, but then to also have the follow through of he was taking care of us. And that's how it is. That's the culture, and that's probably the most simple version of what the memorial party and the whole process of grieving, the years-long process of grieving is about. Throughout that whole time, so those years, maybe it's months, maybe it's years, until the memorial party, you are creating, in whatever that might be. You might be creating beautiful, beautiful chill cat blankets. You might be creating beaded things. You might be creating boxes. You might be creating totem poles. You might be creating very small, if you're just learning it, you might be making bracelets. And there is, even within that, a process of, if you're feeling bad right now, if you're feeling angry, if you're not feeling good, you don't make that. When you're making something, you put your love into it. You might even put your grief into it. But maybe you're thinking of the person who died. And that in itself is the process. It's not just creating things to give to people. The actual process of the creation is part of that grieving process. And there will be a lot of things after, if you can imagine 2 or 3 years going by and a whole clan putting this together, there are a lot of things that get put together. One of the things that I also love about the memorial party is there's so much food. There is a ridiculous amount of food. There is always so much food you cannot eat it there. You have to take it home. There's usually a lot of preserved foods given to you because they know you can't eat it there. And this, another Richard Downhauer, the only way that you as a living can give comfort to your departed is by giving comfort to the living. And that is such a huge part of the culture, is that it's not about the person who's passed anymore. It's about taking care of the people right in front of you that are hurting because they're gone. And that would include, so this is a feast dish. This is actually a really recognizable thing that you don't see much anymore because the feast dish was so important to the culture. That feast dish would be, you'd use it at the feast. For the departed person, you would be burning it, fire bowls. So it's kind of an object you don't see that much anymore because that's an older tradition. But in that object says an awful lot about the culture. And then sort of one of my favorite things about it, and this is Nora Downhauer, who's a beautiful storyteller herself. You listen to these stories, you never know when you're going to need them. She said the elders always told her that. No matter what the story is, you start listening to it because you never know if you're going to need that story. And I love that. I'm a storyteller, so of course. But at the memorial party, The stories would take place as songs. They might take place as oral storytelling. They might take place as dances with masks. They might be funny. They might be action flicks. They might be clan history. But these would be told in all those various forms. There's visual stories. There's so many different forms of storytelling. And we were pretty good at it. And this is what I tell people, like, they're talking about Tlingit being a new form, or being new to theater. It's like, oh no, we've been doing this for thousands of years. We've been performing, and here's the proof. This is a transformation mask, which tells a story, and at a specific point in the story, it transforms into another character. That is a culture that really loves a story. You're actually creating these pieces that take an awful lot of technology to even figure out how to do. I will say, being in the theater, figuring this out right now is like, no. Like, we can't figure that out right now. That is a culture that invests in the story and sees the importance of the story. So all of these things that were put into the memorial party, and these are put into just daily life too, or other things, but specifically the memorial party, were a huge, huge representation of the culture as a whole, of what we valued, of what we did to take care of the grieving and those traumatized. And then literally overnight, this happened. That is the check for the sale of Alaska. At the protestation of the Tlingit people, I might add, that the Russians had absolutely no right to sell Tlingit property to this United States. And so all of a sudden, this was the reigning philosophy of the land. This is William Seward. This is why you won't see many Native people celebrating Seward's Day or anything about him. Alaska Natives, he did not use the term Alaska Natives, I might add. Alaska Natives can neither be preserved as a distinct social community nor incorporated into our society. The Indian tribes will do here as they seem to have done in Washington Territory and British Columbia. They will merely serve the turn until civilized white men come. At the time that was said, Alaska was about 3% white, 97% Native. And that was the plan. And boy, did they do a good job. They absolutely executed the plan well, put a lot of resources into it, put a lot of time and energy from the government. And this was a somewhat more modern result. The no dogs or Indians sort of era. That was all over downtown Juneau. That was all over the region. That was all over Alaska. All of a sudden, in our own land, we were second-class citizens. Our art, our artifacts, our spiritual objects were stolen. This is an object that was stolen by John Barrymore, the actor. It was recently returned. This is an object from a village from my ancestors, Tuxacan, and it was recently returned to the clan. The village itself no longer exists, but the clan now has it back. And the items were stolen, but then something else, when they saw the specific culture of the Tlingit people and other Canadian and Northwest Coast tribes, was what they called the potlat. We would call it memorial parties or kuiks or payoff parties. All of those things are to be given away at one party. These are all collected items, and that's not all of them, but that is just a small part of what is being gathered to give away at a party, at a memorial party. And they did not like it. Very soon after the purchase of Alaska, potlatches, as they were called by the US government, were made illegal. They were made illegal in Canada, and they were made illegal in the United States. And literally overnight, the process that we had for grieving as a community was unlawful. It was, you could be put in prison for up to 2 years for taking part in a memorial party. And this is an Alaskan, this is a Canadian leader reflecting back. In 1977, he was reflecting back We have come to say goodbye to our life. All of the chiefs standing in a circle around their regalia. Their regalia was gathered to be burned. Were weeping as if someone had died, because someone did die. And it was a way of life that was not just under attack, it was being actively killed right in front of them. At the same time that happened, this was happening, boarding schools, what originally called the Great Death, it was actually 2 Great Deaths, where up to 90% of some villages died through what's called the Spanish flu, other smallpox epidemics. So all of the children are being shipped off to boarding school. The leaders were dying. And what we did not have at that exact moment in time was a process of grief, was a process that we knew how to address trauma as a community. And we did not have a process to address it individually, because that just was not part of the culture. Why would you? You're traumatized, you're grieving. Why on earth would you do that alone? And so at the time we needed it most, that process was taken away from us. And it's a complex reason why we have so many issues today. But I 100% believe this is an important part of that. That is an important part of why we struggle so much today, is that process that we've been addressing all of these things we're still holding on to as a people. We have never released those or know how to release those. A lot of those traditions were lost because the people couldn't pass it on. But here's the good news. They were not successful. It did not completely work. Their plan to kill us or change us or civilize us in their way was not a complete success. And I'm not saying that, see, we're 100% exactly who we always were. No, there's been so much loss, just an unbearable amount of loss sometimes. Speaking about it, I always get emotional because the amount of loss is literally immeasurable. But this is what we have today, still. We have a very proud culture. We have many proud cultures, but when I speak of the Tlingit culture, I don't think anyone that knows Tlingit people would ever think them anything but very proud of the culture. I am very proud of the culture. It's vibrant. It's visually vibrant, much less anything else. This is a dance group that I used to dance with up in Anchorage doing. They're invited now every year to the UAA graduation, and they perform there. And I love watching it. I've done it only once. It's a very intimidating thing to also do, but it's being incorporated into non-Tlingit things to do. We're taking back many of the things that we lost, which is why I'm calling it Still Healing Through Storytelling, because part of that is going back to those initial workshops that I was doing and going, this is the next step. We were talking about individual, now we need to talk about it as a community. But it's also named Still Healing Through Storytelling because we've always done it. I'm not talking about a new process we need to create. We've known how to do these. We are very sophisticated in how we knew how to manage your mental, your spiritual, your physical, your emotional health all as one. It was a very holistic way of looking at things. We knew how to do this. I'm not even 100% sure that's a Tlingit picture, but I just love that picture so much. That is how we handled things. Sometimes it was quiet moments, but it was always moments that were together. And it truly is not a individual process. This is the community of Huna and the, gosh, I'm gonna get it wrong, Forest Service. The Federal Forest Service, the name for it. I see Yarrow like mouthing it in the back, but the Federal Forest Service. Anyways, this is the Healing Totem that they put up in Glacier Bay, and it was meant to recognize that there were an awful lot of harms done by the federal government to the Huna people, specifically in regards to Glacier Bay, being able to hunt out of there, being able to live there, being able to gather there, and both a recognition and a commitment to work better in the future, to communicate better in the future. And it's literally called the Healing Totem. And this was just put up last year. These are things that are being done as a community. These are things that need to be done as a community because the suffering and the pain was as a community. And the abuse done was from another community. That wasn't just individuals, that was a federal government, that was organizations, that was businesses that were doing the harm. So this kind of thing happening makes me feel so good that this is a pretty new thing, I might add, that non-Native organizations would come and want to be doing with this. An important one I thought was there was a church that has been, and I'm going to mess that one up too, of which one it is, but that has been apologizing and recognizing the harms they did when they came as missionaries, and the sexual abuse and the boarding schools and the missionary schools, and recognizing the harm. And that's the start. That really is the start, to have a community come to a community and say, we harmed you and we want to help in the healing. And at a level of where we are personally, I never, ever, ever thought when I was a kid that I would see a traditional Tlingit canoe in the water. I was born in 1982. It feels like 100 years ago, but it wasn't that long ago. I never thought I'd see that, much less sit in it. I cried. The first time I was in a Tlingit canoe, I cried. I never imagined I would see this, that I would see dozens of canoes lined up performing the traditional ceremonies to even come on land, to see that, to experience, to be in that, and see this resurgence of things that were literally illegal not that long ago. This is where I have hope. When we see things like this, in just the last few years, literally the last few years, there's been a resurgence of Alaska Native traditional tattooing. And especially for Inuit, Inupiaq, Yupik cultures, that was so important to becoming a woman in that transition from girlhood into womanhood. And there's a lot of other reasons you would tattoo, but to see that and see that Alaska Native women are at the forefront of that is so powerful that it's not just, here we have a cool thing, a cool object. It's we're getting into the whole reason that we created these things and did these things and are helping girls become women, because we don't seem to have that in society, the United States society right now. We're kind of also combining the sort of new and old. This is Nakahiti theater. This is Gene Tag. I love watching him. It's amazing. But sort of combining what we used to do in a new way. We never had like paid, like pay you to come and watch us kind of things as you're done in community experiences or clan-to-clan experiences or educational experiences. But I love it. It's a way to get people learning about our own traditions and educating those who don't know about the culture, who may be new here or just live here and don't know about it, to educate them on it. Here's one of my favorites right now. So Molly of Denali. This is a massive nationwide educational tool, but also a tool to really get back into the culture. And not 200 years ago culture. This is the culture of today. So this is one of the my first episode, where she just learns how to make navagi, which you might have heard as a guduk or Eskimo ice cream. Don't say that word though. But this is her learning how to make it, because that's what a lot of Alaska Native children do, is make a guduk and have trouble with their dogs and learn science. This is such a powerful way to get people, get them across the nation, but also for Alaska Native children to see themselves for the first time ever. And we now do memorial parties. And actually, we have done those things since I was a kid. But we're doing more of them. We're getting it recorded, exactly what you're supposed to do, because there's a lot of protocol, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of ceremony that you do for a reason. And we're really relearning that process of grief. Even though it's hard, it's very hard to heal as a community when you might live all over the world, but we're doing it. And that makes me very, very hopeful about how we can do that as a community going forward. I think it still takes more though, because of course it does. What we have to figure out is how to formalize a lot of these things. And it doesn't sound fun to sort of this culture of sort of American exceptionalism where everyone's an individual and you're supposed to do your own thing. How do you, as a community, say this is how we're gonna heal together? This is what we're gonna do. This is who's responsible for taking care of the people that are grieving, and what is my responsibility to that group? And who's gonna take care of me and know that if I'm grieving and I'm in trouble, someone's gonna take care of me. That's a huge step that we have to take that we don't have. We really don't have it right now as a whole. I know I have it in my family. I know I have it in a larger Tlingit and Alaska Native community, but it's not that formal anymore. It's not as much of the process that it should be. So in a lot of ways, those are our next steps. So this is totally gonna sound like a plug. I promise it's not. Though of course you should come see the play. This is actually an awful lot of what Devilfish is about. While it's being told as a fictional story, every single element of it comes from the Tlingit culture. This is 10,000 years ago in the Ice Age, and we have raccoon stories. And if you want to know more about that, you have to come see the play, because I love it. Every Tlingit I say, like, raccoon? The raccoon in Tlingit country. It's like, you'll see. It is a story about a girl recovering from the trauma of a great sea monster destroying her entire village. So there are an awful lot of action sequences and battles and dances and fun, but ultimately it's all of those things that I just talked about. It's her learning to grieve. It's her learning to accept it, because she doesn't. Spoiler alert, she doesn't. The entire play, maybe she does it at the end. And that is a reflection of where we are as a culture. We are having to relearn that when there's no one left necessarily to teach us. There are few people that can teach us, and we're trying to learn from them as fast as we can. And while we're doing that, we are actively going through the process that you would like you were doing a memorial party. So this is just a few days ago. My parents were out there making paddles and painting them for the play. Dance paddles, they're smaller paddles than you would for real paddling. But they're real Tlingit paddles. We're also, besides creating an awful lot of authentic Tlingit art, I should say objects, because we didn't have a word for art. We used everything. So besides what we're creating new, we're borrowing things like this feast dish from the Hooni Indian Association. And we're gonna display it in a very fun way in the play, within the play, in the story of the play, as we would have before. And then along with that comes some new things, and I'm so glad Yara could be here. So Yara took the cast out on a fun canoe journey, because most of the cast is actually not Tlingit, they're not from here. So this is a California Native person who is so excited to go out. FYI, he saw his first whale ever today. He's pretty pumped. And then Ben Cornell met us after this amazing canoe journey, met us with this wolf mask and fur, and Kenny does have a moment of wolf-like things in the play, so he got to sort of create that. And it's figuring out those things that we have to create now. So we need an actor who's a trained actor to learn Tlingit things so he can dance. He's been every single day training to dance Tlingit and paddle like a Tlingit person and wear a wolf mask like a Tlingit person. This was our canoe journey the other day. We are trying to teach them not just how to act Tlingit. We are putting on a Tlingit story. We are putting on a Tlingit story as it has not been seen and how it has not been allowed to be told for a century. We are trying to do it as best as we can, knowing that we have these sort of new elements, like paying for a ticket. That's such a non-Tlingit thing, but so you have to pay for a ticket so we can put it on. So how do we do those things? And it's amazing to figure out, but that is such a part of how we get back to this is what we've always done. It's not figuring out all the new things to do, but this is what we've always done. We've always performed these stories. We've always created these things. We've always used this to grieve. We've always used this to celebrate. So we're hopefully gonna do a good job, and it's sort of the very first play we're gonna try and do this with. We're gonna see what happens and see if that works, and there's new processes that we're including in the play that are not done in usual theater. Like family and children are absolutely welcome to every rehearsal, because the children can't learn if they're not there. So they're welcome to be there. So how can we do those kinds of things within the confines of, it's still a union thing. We still have like rules we need to follow. So I wish there was an end to this, but there's no end to what we're doing. So I'm just gonna say, oh, no, I do have one thing. I wanted to show this because I cried when I saw this. This was done by Abel Ryan, who is a Tsimshian carver, and it is stunning, and I hope you all come see it up close. You'll see it in the play. It's a devilfish mask. The devilfish character wears this. And I cried because, again, I did not think I would actually own something like a mask that would be performed in a Tlingit story. We always used to do those things. We were not allowed to do them anymore. These things were burned. And now, oh no. And now we get to put it into a story to show you the absolutely beautiful culture we've always been doing, always been telling, and show you how we grieve, and that it's a communal process. And there was one last thing, which is, because in a Tlingit memorial party, you get things like seaweed. So put in little packets, get seaweed. This was from the Healing Totem. This was actually some of the chips from the Healing Totem that was given to my grandmother. A lot of this is one of the favorite things at a memorial party. You get some jam. This is my grandma's jam. Or dried halibut. This is also a big favorite. But you would get, one at a time, all these things. I do not have enough of all these things for you, but I do have some little gifts for you all, because I do want you to experience, like, this is part of it. This is absolutely part of it. Thank you for coming here and seeing me and listening to me and sort of letting me release my knowledge. And for that, I would like to give you a very small gift in thanks. The end.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
A microphone is, whoa.
Yeah. Okay. We have people that are online, but they
Okay.
need to hear you.
I guess the question that I have is, I myself am going through a grieving process right now over a death. And do you perceive that it would be possible for this kind of community grieving to be taught to a world that doesn't know how to do this? You know, an entire world that doesn't know about how to do this.
I actually just realized one appropriate way of handling this is it would always be a clan member that would help you. I happen to have a clan member here, my sister, who will actually help these. I only said no because it's more appropriate for the hosting people. to give that. So in this way, we got to recruit. Yeah, so that's part of what the play is about. Not that the play is the answer to everything, like there's only so many seats, you know? But it's literally through the play is teaching that process of grieving. Antina 2 is learning it. I should say Antina 2 is not learning it, the character in the play, so she keeps having to get taught and taught because she's holding on to it and she's trying to be very individual with it. For sort of the larger community where we're going to go out and where I'm going to go to different communities across the region in October is a workshop where first we're going to discuss it because it's definitely not something I'm going to come up with, that it's not going to be, here, I have the answer. It's going to be a community answer. It's going to be a community-driven answer. It's going to be things that are already being done. So it is sort of a, how can we, one, what should we do? Two, how can we start doing it? Three, how can we make sure others know about that? So that's what the kind of, this is kind of the next phase, and here's how we're starting to figure out how to do that. So sorry that's not much of an answer, but we're trying to figure out exactly that right now. But come see Antina 2, not learn it and not learn it and not learn it again, and be taught it. Goodness, jeez.
Any other questions?
Yes.
How important do you think the intent is in the artistic healing process? Are there people who are just stumbling their way into it, or do you think it's, oh, I'm so sorry. Should I take some time? All right, perfect. How important is intent to the artistic healing process? Are there folks who are stumbling their way through it, or do you think they really need to sit down with that on their minds?
Certainly you can stumble through it. That's definitely how I did it most of my life. was I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And that was my process. Honestly, I'm so stressed out with this play coming out. I wrote a bunch this morning that was just, and that's how I do it. I never was told, go write, go create art to heal. It was something I discovered myself. If we had the same traditions that we had always had and those were not taken from us, I would have absolutely been taught those things. That would have been something that, as a girl, I was taught how to do to become a woman. And all of those things that you do as a woman, whether it's weaving, whether it's taking care of the wealth of the clan, whether it's figuring out all the internal politics, those are all part of the process that I would have been taught. So I think right now, intent should be everything, but we can't. So I will say with the workshops that I was doing, that's why the sort of second phase is happening, is because there was such a need and there was such a cry for it, for healing. And those personal things do matter. Certainly I did it for a couple decades and it helped me, but we need to do this as a community. We need to do this as a family. We need to do this as a clan. Whatever your community is, we need to do it together. So that's what we're figuring out, is how to be intentional.
Any more questions?
Chimai, my name is Alyssa Madrid, and I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing. I'm a Lutic, I'm from Kodiak, and I'm...
I used to live in Kodiak.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
I lived
awesome.
everywhere.
I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing all of this, and you know, for me as a young Indigenous woman, it's amazing to see someone like you doing so much, and I just want you to know that you're appreciated and you're seen, and can't wait to go see your play. Thank you.
Goodness, jeez.
Any more questions?
Yeah, thank you for sharing. This is something that's been on my mind recently. I was doing a lot of reading about indigenous culture in Alaska, and it's amazing how much you don't really know until you dig deeper, right? Like this portion of Alaska, this portion of the world is just one element of, yeah, so many cultures, and I appreciate you sharing. And one thing that has really, I guess, driven my love of Alaska is being involved with a place that is still connected with the people who have been here for such a long time. And, you know, this connection with a spirituality of the environment, and something that I appreciate. But I'm also at a point where I don't really understand how to take the next step to be involved in a process where, you know, I'm not Tlingit. But it's like, yeah, how do you engage people, or what's a good call to action for somebody to be involved when you say there are a lot of rules and stipulations about how a ceremony needs to go about? And just for like the gift, you know, that's something that you learn,
yeah,
right?
I know. It's always an awkward thing. Is like, how do I do this without saying I appreciate you, but it's not allowed? But you know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that has kind of been on my mind, because it is a really complicated thing, healing, connecting with people, understanding cultural boundaries and respecting that, but also wanting to be involved. I guess, what is a good way for people to kind of take that first step without feeling like they're overstepping their bounds or, you know, disrespecting somebody, but, you know, you're enthusiastic about wanting to be involved. It's just like, all right, how do I do that? You know, what are some of your pieces of advice with that?
Yeah, no, I super appreciate that too, because I think it, without asking, it can turn very quickly into sort of a paternalistic, we're taken over kind of thing. And I think right now in our communities, we're so sensitive to that, because we're finally able to push back and have a voice in some things that for several generations now we haven't. I would say the easiest thing is just start going to things. There are an awful lot of, whether it's public free events, so Tlingit and Haida is always doing something, Alaska Heritage is always doing something. There's always these things. And what's interesting as a Native person is I never knew that non-Native people thought they might not be allowed to those things. So for instance, next month, the Alaska Federation of Natives Convention. It's a thing that probably every Native person at some point has thought about going to or will go to or whatever. And it wasn't until I was an adult that non-Native people started going, oh, it looks so cool, but am I allowed? And it was such a, you know, as part of that community, you don't realize it actually looks very insular, and maybe you're not allowed. You're totally allowed. If Tlingit and Haida or Sea Alaska Heritage or other groups in the community are putting on something, it really is to everyone, and they love it when a lot of people come and a lot of people see the cultures and see the dance groups or see the art. Another one, and this may sound weird, start going to the Native businesses and buying Native art and actually contributing to the economy of the Native culture. And that sounds like a weird, like, go buy things. It's more of, for me as a Native artist, to be able to say I have a livelihood of doing something that back in the day would have been absolutely expected of me, but now I have to fight to be able to do it just to live. Most Native artists are doing that plus something else, just to be able to do the thing they've always, or that has traditionally always been done. So to be able to support a Native artist in anything, literally, I buy earrings everywhere, because I love them, but also because that allows them to do those things that they are probably doing on the side just because they have to, versus that's a Tlingit carver back in the day would have just been a carver. You know, they would have hunted, they would have done those things for the community, but that's what they would have done. And it's almost impossible to do that now unless you're a few people that can really make that work. So to me, going to the things and, I mean, literally just frequenting, whether it's Native businesses or if you see something on Facebook, some cool earrings, some cool piece of art, going out on a canoe journey, like go do that. I don't know if that doesn't sound super amazing, but to me that's where it starts. And when you meet the people and start to get to know the people, and on all these events you start seeing those people and figuring out the dance groups you really like and finding out the businesses you really love and the art you really love, like, and you start making those relationships. I think all the rest comes.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
My name's Lorena Gray, and I'm an Inupiaq from Nome and Kotzebue. My great uncle was one of the founders of AFN, Nick Gray, who fought till his dying day from leukemia for the Native people's rights to their land. And your ability of what you're doing is really beneficial to encourage me to, the whole time I wanted to cry, but because I've been distant from my culture because I was raised, my mom was, my grandpa was from Seattle, so we weren't in touch with our culture. But now at 34, I'm finally reconnecting with who I am and where I came from. So thank you.
Goodness, geez. Any more questions? I too would like to thank you very much. I'm a Yupik from Aniak and Jochpaluk on the Kuskokwim River. And it has been very emotional to me to hear you talk about what we all went through. I went to a boarding school, and that was very, very hard. But I grew up. Any more questions? Thank you very much.